The house still smelled like linseed oil and cedar, that particular scent that clings to old wood when it's been loved back to life. And on any other night, Julian would have found comfort in it. But tonight, every familiar scent felt foreign. Every shadow fell at the wrong angle. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. He sat in the leather chair by the bay window, blueprints untouched on the drafting table behind him, watching the rain trace silver veins down the glass. The old Victorian they'd spent 2 years restoring together, every crown molding, every hand-stripped banister, every joist he'd reinforced with his own hands, now felt like a monument to something already dead. He heard her footsteps on the staircase, measured, careful, the way a person walks when they know they're approaching the edge of something but haven't yet decided whether to jump or turn back. Vivian appeared in the doorway, still wearing her concert blacks, a few strands of auburn hair falling loose around her jaw. Her cello case leaned against the wall behind her like a dark silhouette, like a witness. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. And that, perhaps, was part of the cruelty of it all. Julian. Her voice was soft, tentative, the voice of a woman who had been living inside a slowly widening silence for weeks and had finally gathered enough courage to name it. He didn't turn from the window. Julian, please. Can we just talk? You haven't looked at me. Really looked at me. In weeks, you don't come to my performances anymore. You sleep in the studio. You treat me like a tenant, not a wife. Like someone you're tolerating rather than someone you chose. He let the silence stretch. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof they'd reshingled together the summer after they moved in, sunburned and laughing, passing tiles up a ladder like a choreographed act. Back when every shared task felt like an adventure. Back when they were building something. Why don't you love me anymore? Her voice broke on the last word, and he could hear the tears gathering behind it, thick and desperate and real. What did I do? Just tell me what I did. Julian finally turned. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and he allowed himself one small, sad smile. Not a smile of cruelty, though later she would remember it that way. A smile of exhaustion, of someone who had carried a weight far too long and was finally, mercifully setting it down. You gave away what belonged to me, he said quietly. Now, before I continue, I need you to hear something. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of betrayal never even crossed your mind, if you've ever looked at the person you loved and realized with a sickening clarity that you were staring at a stranger, then this story is going to cut deep, because this is the story of a man who discovered his wife's darkest secret, and instead of exploding, instead of screaming or breaking things, he did something far more devastating. He went silent for 5 months, and what he did next, what he said in that living room, will stay with you long after the story ends. But to understand how Julian ended up in that chair, holding a leather portfolio full of evidence and a heart full of broken glass, we need to go back to the very beginning, to the night 2 strangers collided at an art gallery in Boston and changed each other's lives forever. Before we dive in, if you're someone who believes that love should be protected, that loyalty still matters, that trust is sacred, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss a single moment of what's about to unfold. It was a frozen evening in January, 12 years before that rainy night. Boston was buried under a fresh layer of snow, and the Alderman Gallery on Newbury Street glowed like a lantern against the blue-white dark. Inside, a private exhibition was underway. Contemporary sculpture, modern lighting, the kind of crowd that held wine glasses like accessories and spoke in low, rehearsed opinions about form and negative space. Julian Ashford was not there for the art. He was there for the building. The Alderman Gallery occupied a converted 19th-century textile warehouse, and Julian, 29 years old, 2 years into his career as a restoration architect, was obsessed with its bones. The arched doorways, the exposed iron trusses, the way the original brickwork caught the warm gallery lighting and turned it amber. While everyone else studied the sculptures, Julian stood in a corner sketching the ceiling joists in a worn leather notebook. That's where she found him. "You know," said a voice behind him, warm and laced with amusement. "Most people come to an art gallery to look at the art." He turned, and there she was, Vivian Caldwell, 27, cellist, part of the string quartet hired to provide atmosphere for the evening. She'd set down her bow during a break and wandered over, drawn by the sight of a man so absorbed in something invisible to everyone else that he'd forgotten he was in public. "The building is the art," Julian said, holding up his sketch. "Everything in here was made last year. These walls have been standing for 140 years. Which one do you think has more to say?" She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that cut through the gallery's careful murmur. "That's either the most pretentious thing I've ever heard, or the most honest. Can it be both?" They talked for 3 hours. They missed the rest of the exhibition, the final performance set, and the complimentary dessert course. They sat on a bench in the freight hallway behind the main gallery, sharing a bottle of wine someone had abandoned, and talked about everything and nothing, about buildings and music, about the difference between creating something meant to last and creating something meant to be felt, about the way beauty lives in structure and also in its absence. Julian didn't fall in love with Vivian that night. He wasn't the kind of man who fell. He walked into love, deliberately, eyes open, the way he approached everything in his life. But something shifted in him that evening. Some internal architecture rearranged itself to make room for her. And he knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who trusts his own blueprints, that she was the one building he would never want to finish designing. Because finishing would mean there was nothing left to discover. They married 2 years later, under a wooden arbor draped with white wisteria in her grandmother's garden. The photograph from that day, Vivian's laugh caught mid-bloom, Julian's arms wrapped around her as if he'd never let go, would sit on the mantelpiece of every home they shared. A monument, a promise, a before. Together they built a life with the careful intention of two people who understood that beautiful things require maintenance. They found the Victorian on Belford Street condemned and gutted, the roof sagging, the porch collapsed, the interior stripped to bare studs. Julian saw the bones. Vivienne saw the soul. They bought it for a price that reflected its condition and spent 2 years bringing it back to life. She stripped wallpaper at midnight while he reinforced floor joists by flashlight. They argued over paint colors. Sage green won after 3 rounds of samples and one near-divorce-level debate about the difference between sage and seafoam. He designed custom bookshelves for her sheet music, with a hidden compartment where he'd leave architectural sketches tucked. Beside her scores, little drawings of imaginary buildings with notes like, "This one has a concert hall inside." For you, they developed rituals the way long marriages do. Sunday morning coffee on the porch, rain or shine. Julian in the 3rd row of every performance, always the 3rd row, because that's where the acoustics were best and he wanted to hear her the way she deserved to be heard. Her habit of humming Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 while cooking. His habit of kissing her forehead before he left for a site visit, every single morning without fail. For 10 years, these rituals held. The foundation was solid. The structure was sound. But even the strongest buildings develop fractures if no one checks the walls. Looking back, Julian would recognize the signs he'd missed. Or more accurately, the signs he'd chosen not to examine too closely. The way Vivian sometimes stared out windows mid-conversation, her eyes going somewhere he couldn't follow. The restlessness in her fingers. During quiet evenings, not the productive restlessness of a musician itching to practice, but the aimless kind. The kind that belongs to someone who feels trapped but can't name the cage. He noticed, but he didn't press, because Julian trusted his wife the way he trusted load-bearing walls, completely, structurally, without question. That trust was about to cost him everything. The autumn that changed everything arrived without warning. October, the leaves along Belford Street turning copper and gold, the air carrying that particular New England crispness that makes everything feel like the beginning of something. But for Vivian, it felt like the beginning of an ending she couldn't articulate. She was 39. In 7 months she would turn 40, and though she would never have admitted it aloud, the number haunted her. Not because of vanity. Vivian had never been vain, but because 40 felt like a border crossing into a country where the landscape was predetermined. Her mother had been 40 when the light went out of her eyes, still married, still functional, still smiling at dinner parties, but hollow, comfortable, quietly resigned. Vivian had sworn she would never become that woman. And yet, the orchestra had become routine. The same repertoire cycled through with minor variations. Brahms in autumn, Tchaikovsky in winter, Beethoven in spring. She played beautifully. She always played beautifully, but she was playing from muscle memory rather than from her gut. The music moved through her without touching her. At home, the rituals that once felt like sacred ground now felt like grooves worn too deep to escape. Same coffee, same porch, same comfortable, predictable, suffocating sameness. She looked at Julian across the breakfast table and saw a good man, a devoted man, a man who had never once failed her. And she felt, and the guilt of this feeling would later eat her alive, Bored. She didn't tell him. That was the first betrayal, though she wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. She swallowed her dissatisfaction the way her mother had, and she smiled, and the gap between what she felt and what she showed grew wider every day. A crack in the foundation, invisible from the outside. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell other people. They're the ones we tell ourselves. Vivian told herself she was fine, that the restlessness would pass, that every marriage had seasons of quiet, and this was simply theirs. She was wrong about all of it. Then the orchestra announced the Mahler cycle. 4 performances of Mahler's complete symphonic works, a prestige project that required a guest conductor of international caliber. They brought in Dominic Voss. He arrived like weather. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of restless energy that filled every room he entered and left no space for anyone else's gravity. Recently divorced. Passionately opinionated. The kind of man who conducted not just with his hands but with his entire body, as if the music were a physical force moving through him. The first rehearsal, he stopped the orchestra mid-phrase during the second movement of Mahler's Fifth. The room went silent. He pointed his baton at the cello section. "There," he said, his accent faintly European, impossible to place, sharpening the word. That phrasing, third chair. That's exactly right. That's exactly what Mahler intended. The rest of you, listen to her. Learn from her. Third chair. Vivian. She felt the blood rise to her face, felt every eye in the section turn toward her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Seen. Specifically, precisely, unmistakably seen. Here's the thing about temptation, and I need you to really hear this. It never announces itself. It doesn't arrive wearing a sign that says, "I'm going to destroy your life." It arrives as a compliment, a shared interest, a glance that lingers half a second too long, a phone number exchanged for perfectly reasonable, professional reasons. The destruction comes later, so gradually, so quietly, that you don't even notice you're on fire until everything around you is ash. At the post-rehearsal reception, they talked about Mahler, about the Fifth Symphony specifically, about longing and grief and beauty born from suffering. Dominic spoke about music the way Julian spoke about architecture, with reverence, with intimacy, as if it were a living thing. The conversation felt profound, charged, dangerous in a way Vivian refused to name. He asked for her number. To discuss interpretive approaches for the Adagietto, she gave it, without hesitation, told herself it was professional. It wasn't. The messages started the next day. Professional at first. Rehearsal notes, articles about Mahler's compositional process, thoughts on tempo. Then one night, Julian was asleep, and Vivian was lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of her unnamed restlessness. Her phone buzzed. Can't sleep. Thinking about today's rehearsal, thinking about a lot of things. How are you? She should have set the phone down. She should have rolled over and put her arm around her husband, the man who had built her bookshelves with hidden compartments, who sat in the third row of every performance, who had never once in 12 years given her a reason to doubt him. She typed back. They talked until 3 in the morning. She told Dominic things she hadn't told Julian, her fear of 40, her creative stagnation, her feeling of dissolving into routine until there was nothing left of the woman she used to be. He listened. He understood. He said all the right things with all the right intensity, and the crack in the foundation widened. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became a kiss in the parking garage beneath the concert hall after a rehearsal that ran 2 hours past schedule, though not because of the music. She should have pulled away. Every cell in her body that still belonged to her marriage screamed at her to stop. But she kissed him back, and in that moment, the woman who had stood beneath a wisteria arbor and promised forever became someone else entirely. The first hotel was on Meridian Street. Blue awning. 3rd floor. She parked around the block because she was terrified someone from the orchestra would recognize her car. The guilt was immediate, sharp and nauseating, a physical thing that sat in her chest like a stone. But so was the adrenaline. And here's what no one tells you about guilt and adrenaline. When they compete, adrenaline almost always wins. The affair continued. Weeks became a month. A month became 2. She constructed an elaborate architecture of lies. Fake sectional rehearsals, invented colleagues, strategically deleted messages, private browsing, a second email account. The irony was exquisite and terrible. She was building a structure of deception while living in a house built entirely on honesty. She convinced herself she could have both. The security and history of Julian, the electricity and novelty of Dominic. Compartmentalization became her survival strategy. She divided herself into two women, the wife who made coffee on Sunday mornings and the woman who parked around the block from a hotel and walked in with her head down. Neither woman acknowledged the other, and for a while the architecture of lies held. But 2 weeks after the affair began, while Vivian was still telling herself it was manageable, temporary, harmless, Julian found out. He was searching the household cloud for a photograph, something mundane, a before and after shot of their kitchen renovation that a client had asked to see as a reference. He typed kitchen into the search bar and scrolled through the results. And there they were, not one or two messages, dozens, backed up automatically from Vivian's tablet, synced to their shared account. Intimate, explicit, unmistakable, timestamps and locations, pet names and promises, plans for meetings disguised as professional obligations. The floor dropped away. The air left his lungs. The screen blurred as his eyes filled with tears he refused, absolutely refused, to let fall. His first instinct was primal. Storm upstairs. Wake her. Demand answers. Shatter something, a plate, a window, the careful facade of their perfect life. He wanted to scream. He wanted to hear her explain this. He wanted her to tell him it wasn't real, that he was misreading it, that there was some impossible innocent explanation for why his wife was sending another man messages that read like love letters written in a burning building. But Julian did not storm upstairs. He did not scream. He did not break a single thing. Instead, he sat in his drafting studio for 3 hours, staring at the wall where their wedding photograph hung. The wisteria, the laughter, the arms that would never let go. And then he made a decision that would define everything that followed. He would wait, not out of weakness, not out of fear, out of something more complex, more painful, more deeply loving than confrontation could ever be. He wanted to see if she would stop, if conscience would intervene, if the woman he married was still in there somewhere, fighting her way back. He was giving her a chance, the most excruciating gift a betrayed person can offer, the chance to choose him. And so Julian began to watch, and to document, methodically, architecturally, with the same precision he brought to every structural assessment, dates, times, message transcripts cross-referenced against her stated whereabouts, orchestra schedules compared against her claimed rehearsals, a draftsman building the blueprint of his own heartbreak, hoping with every new page that the next entry would be the last, that she'd end it, that she'd come home. She never did. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. Drop your answer in the comments below. If you discovered your partner's betrayal, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait, the way Julian did, to see if they would choose you on their own? There's no wrong answer, but your answer says everything about who you are. And while you're thinking about that, if this story has its hooks in you, smash that like button right now. It helps more than you know. 5 months. That's how long Julian lived inside the lie. Not Vivian's lie. His own. The lie of pretending he didn't know. 150 to 3 days of watching his wife get ready for events he knew she wasn't attending. The new perfume she thought he hadn't noticed. Something sharper, more sophisticated than the vanilla she'd always worn. The careful outfit selections for late rehearsals. The phone placed face down on the counter whenever he walked into a room. He made dinner. He asked about her day. He listened to her fabrications with a face made of stone and a heart made of splintering glass. And every night after she'd gone to sleep, or pretended to, he retreated to his studio and added another page to the portfolio. He moved out of their bedroom gradually, first falling asleep at his drafting table after late nights, then bringing a blanket, then a pillow. Vivian noticed the shift but didn't push. She asked once casually if everything was okay. He said he was working on a deadline. She accepted it without question, relieved, he suspected, because his distance gave her more freedom. That was the part that killed him. Not the affair, not the lies. The relief in her eyes when he pulled away, as if his absence was a gift she hadn't dared to ask for. One night in January, 4 months into his silent vigil, Julian stood outside their bedroom door at midnight. He could hear her through the wood, not talking, laughing, that soft, breathless laugh she used to say for him. The laugh that meant delight, surprise, intimacy. She was reading a message, or maybe watching a video he'd sent, and she was laughing the way she used to laugh on Sunday mornings when Julian would slip terrible architectural puns into conversation just to see her smile. That sound, her laughter given to someone else, was the moment Julian felt something inside him die. Not break, die. Breaking implies the possibility of repair. This was different. This was a light going out. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs only to the betrayed. It's not the loneliness of being alone. Anyone can endure that. It's the loneliness of lying next to someone who's already gone, of being present in a room where you've become invisible, of drowning in plain sight while the person who promised to save you is swimming towards someone else's shore. Julian lived inside that loneliness for 5 months, and it nearly consumed him. But it didn't, because Julian was an architect. And architects understand something fundamental about structures under stress. You can let them collapse, or you can control the demolition. Julian chose to control it, which brings us back to that rainy night. The leather chair, the bay window, Vivian in the doorway asking the question that would unravel everything. Why don't you love me anymore? The color left her face in stages when he spoke Dominic's name. First, the flush from crying, then the warmth beneath it, then something foundational, the structural integrity of whatever composure she'd been maintaining. How long have you known? She whispered. Since November. 2 weeks after it started. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's been 5 months. He let the number land. 5 months of watching you leave this house with your cello and your lies. 5 months of you coming home smelling like cologne I've never owned, kissing my cheek and asking what I wanted for dinner. 5 months of wondering if today would be the day you'd tell me, whether you'd choose me, choose us. I was going to. You weren't. The words weren't angry. They were architectural, load-bearing, facts upon which everything else rested. I gave you every opening. I pulled back. I went quiet. I created space for you to feel the distance and come to me with the truth. But you didn't come to me with the truth, Vivian. You came to me tonight asking why I don't love you. As if you genuinely don't know. He reached beneath the drafting table and pulled out the leather portfolio. She recognized it, the kind he used for site assessments, for documenting the condition of buildings before restoration. He opened it. Inside were printed pages, message transcripts, hotel receipts, cross-referenced schedules, all organized with the meticulous care of a man who builds things meant to last. October 29th. He pulled out a page, his hand steady despite everything. I haven't felt this way in years. You see me in a way no one else does. You sent that at 11:14 p.m. He looked up. I was downstairs fixing the dishwasher. Vivian pressed both hands to her face. November 8th. Tonight was perfect. I don't want to go home. You told me you had an emergency sectional rehearsal. He set the page down with surgical care. I checked the orchestra's schedule. There was no rehearsal that night. Please stop. December 3rd. His voice wavered for the first time, a hairline crack running through the foundation. I think I'm falling for you. I know it's complicated, but I don't care anymore. He looked at her. You wrote that from our bathroom. I could hear the faucet running through the wall. Vivian was sobbing now, the ugly, gasping, full-body kind that comes from a place beyond grief. Julian, please listen. I didn't plan this. I never wanted. Nobody plans it. His voice went quiet. But you sustained it. That's the part everyone forgets. Maybe the first moment is impulsive, reckless, fine. But every moment after that is a choice. Every message you typed, a choice. Every lie you told me, a choice. Every time. You stood in our kitchen and looked me in the eyes and said, I love you, while your phone buzzed with his messages in your pocket. That was a choice, Vivian. You made hundreds of them, and every single one was the wrong one. He stood and walked to the fireplace mantel. The wedding photograph, the wisteria, the woman who would have been horrified by what she'd become. You asked me why I don't love you anymore, but that's not even the right question. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw the full devastation, the hollowed-out landscape of a man who had spent 5 months grieving a marriage while still trapped inside it. The question is, what is there left to love? The woman I married wouldn't have done this. The woman I built this house with, sanded these floors with, fought over paint colors with, stayed up until 3 a.m. with planning our future. That woman is gone. You replaced her with someone I don't recognize. I'm still here, Vivian whispered. I'm still that woman. No. The word was quiet and absolute. That woman wouldn't have given pieces of herself to someone else. Our intimacy, our trust, our loyalty. Those weren't just words in our vows. They were the architecture of everything we were. and you dismantled them beam by beam and handed them to a man who will forget your name in a year. He won't. She stopped. The word hung in the air, half-formed, damning. Julian noticed. Something behind his eyes shifted. A door closing, locking. So you're still protecting him? Even now? No, that's not what I've spoken to a lawyer. His voice was flat, final. Papers will be ready by Friday. I'm going to Luca's place in Marblehead. When I come back Monday, I'd like you to have found somewhere else to stay. Julian, no, please. We can work through this, counseling, therapy. I'll end it tonight, right now. I'll call him And what? He looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but something worse. The total exhaustion of a man who has loved past his own breaking point and has nothing left to give. Uninvite him from our marriage? He's already been here, Vivian. He's been in our bed, in your thoughts, in the spaces that were supposed to be ours. You can't unring that bell. People recover from this. Couples rebuild. They do. But I won't. His voice cracked on the last word, then steadied. Because I spent 5 months waiting for you to choose me, and you never did. Not once. You had 100 chances to stop, to come home in every sense of that word, and every single time you chose him. I have to believe what your actions told me, even when your words say something different now. My actions right now are telling you I want to fight for us. Your actions right now are telling me you got caught. The silence that followed was the loudest thing either of them had ever heard. Julian picked up his coat. He paused at the door, his hand resting on the brass knob they'd found together at an antique market in Vermont on a weekend trip when the biggest problem in their lives was whether to get the brass or the nickel finish. I hope the music was beautiful, he said without turning around. I hope whatever you felt with him was worth the price of what you've lost, because the cost was everything. The door closed with a soft, deliberate click, not a slam. Something worse, a period at the end of a sentence that would never continue. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are feeling something right now. Anger, sadness, recognition, maybe all three at once. If this story is hitting close to home, I need you to know something. You are not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Send it to someone you love. Because sometimes the stories that hurt the most are the ones that heal us. And trust me, what happens next changes everything. Vivian didn't move for a long time after the door closed. She sat in the darkening living room as the rain intensified, rattling the windows. The leather portfolio sat on her lap, heavy as a headstone. She opened it. Page after page, Julian had documented everything with the meticulous precision of a man who designs buildings meant to stand for centuries. Dates, times, message transcripts, hotel receipts that appeared on their shared credit card before she'd thought to use cash. Cross-references between her stated whereabouts and the orchestra's publicly posted rehearsal schedule. Every lie cataloged, every betrayal time-stamped. He had known. Every single time she walked through that front door with a fabricated story about a difficult passage in the Shostakovich or a last-minute sectional with the violas, he had known exactly where she'd been. And he'd said nothing. He'd made her dinner. He'd asked about her day. He'd lain beside her in the dark, awake, his heart shattering in real time, while she slept the unburdened sleep of someone who believed her secret was safe. The magnitude of his suffering, quiet, invisible, endured entirely alone, made her physically ill. She barely made it to the bathroom. When she came back, shaking and empty, she picked up her phone. A message from Dominic. Hey, free tonight? Missing you. She stared at the words. 12 hours ago, they would have sent a thrill through her chest. Now they made her skin crawl. She saw them for what they were. Not love, not depth, not passion. Just appetite. The casual hunger of a man who had never risked anything, who had offered her nothing of substance, who had taken everything she gave without once asking what it cost. She typed, "It's over. Don't contact me again." Then she blocked his number, deleted his contact, erased every trace of him from her phone with the same thoroughness she should have used months ago, before the hotel rooms, before the lies, before the bathroom at 3 a.m. with the faucet running. It was too little, impossibly too late. But it was done. She called Marin, her oldest friend, the one person she could bear to face, and said 3 words, "He knows. Everything." 40 minutes later, Vivian sat at Marin's kitchen table, hollowed out and trembling, clutching a mug of tea she couldn't drink. Marin sat across from her, waiting, not offering comfort, offering space for truth. He had a folder, Vivian said. Like a case file, organized and dated. 5 months, Marin. He watched me do it for 5 months and said nothing. He was waiting for me to stop. And you didn't? No. The word tasted like ash. I didn't. Do you love him? Dominic? Vivian pressed her palms against her eyes. I thought I did. Or I thought I felt something that looked like love if you squinted hard enough and ignored everything around it. But sitting here now, looking at what it cost, I think what I felt was just noise. It was loud and thrilling and it drowned everything else out. The guilt, the voice telling me to stop. Julian. It drowned out Julian. And Julian? Do you love Julian? The question cracked something open inside her, something that had been sealed shut for months, protected by layers of denial and rationalization and the particular kind of emotional anesthesia that affairs provide. More than anything, she whispered. More than music, more than my own life. And I know how that sounds. I know it's hypocritical and impossible and insane, but he is the only real thing I have ever had, and I burned it down because I was bored and selfish and too much of a coward to sit with my own unhappiness and name it. Marin reached across the table and took her hand. Then write it down. Not for him, for you. So you can see it. So you can never hide from it again. That night on Marin's guest bed, Vivian opened her score annotation notebook, the one she'd used for marking fingerings and bowing patterns for a decade, and began to write. Not music this time. Truth. It started the way these things always start, innocuously. A shared joke at a reception, an exchange of numbers that felt professional and harmless. But nothing is harmless when you're already lonely and too afraid to admit it. She wrote about the intoxication of being seen as something other than a wife, a cellist, a woman approaching 40 with quiet dread. She wrote about how Dominic had listened to her, not better than Julian, she realized now, but differently, with the hungry attention of a man who wanted something, rather than the steady presence of a man who already had her. I mistook novelty for depth. I mistook adrenaline for passion. And I mistook Julian's steadiness for indifference. He wasn't indifferent. He was constant. And I was too foolish, too ungrateful to understand the difference. She wrote about the hotel rooms and the parking around the block and the lies that became easier with practice. She wrote about the night she typed, "I think I'm falling for you" from their bathroom while Julian slept 10 feet away, and how the faucet she ran to cover the sound of her typing was, in retrospect, the saddest detail of her entire life. And then, somewhere around page 22, she wrote the thing she'd been running from all along. The worst thing I did wasn't the affair. The worst thing I did was look at Julian's patience and mistake it for ignorance. He gave me space to come back, and I used that space to go further away. He was fighting for me in silence, hoping, waiting, dying inside, and I didn't even notice. Because I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at myself, reflected in someone else's eyes, and I liked what I saw. I liked it more than the truth. And then the revelation that broke her entirely. As she scrolled through her memories, assembling the timeline of her own destruction, a pattern emerged that she'd been too blinded to see. Whispered conversations she'd overheard and dismissed. A comment from a colleague in the viola section. "He's certainly attentive, isn't he?" said with a knowing look. Vivian had chosen not to decode. The night she'd arrived at Dominic's apartment unannounced and heard a voice inside, a woman's voice, laughing, and he'd opened the door with wet hair and an excuse about his sister visiting. She hadn't questioned it. She hadn't wanted to. But sitting in Marin's guest room, stripped of every illusion, she saw it clearly. Dominic had been pursuing other women in the orchestra simultaneously. She wasn't special to him. She was convenient, available, willing. The depth she'd felt, the soulful conversations about Mahler and loneliness and the unbearable beauty of being truly seen, was a performance. A rehearsed seduction delivered with the same polished intensity he brought to the podium. She had traded Julian, steady, faithful, irreplaceable Julian, for a counterfeit. She had burned down a cathedral to warm herself by a match. She wrote until dawn, 32 pages. Then she closed the notebook and lay in the gray light, feeling the full weight of what she'd done settle into her bones like concrete. This was what she would carry now. Not as punishment, though it felt like punishment, but as education, the most expensive lesson she would ever learn. 300 miles north, Julian stood on the rocky shore behind Luca's cottage, watching the Atlantic fold itself against the stones. The water was iron gray and relentless, reshaping the coastline in increments too small to see. That was how loss worked, he was learning. Not a single catastrophic collapse, but a slow erosion. wave after wave after wave, until the landscape of your life was unrecognizable. Luca had asked few questions. He'd taken one look at Julian's face when he arrived, unshaven, hollow-eyed, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and the look of a man who'd been gutted, and handed him a glass of whiskey. Stay as long as you need. That was the gift of a brother who understood that sometimes presence matters more than words. Julian hiked the coastal trails for hours, pushing his body until his muscles screamed and his mind quieted. In motion, he could almost forget. Almost. But when he returned to the cottage each evening, tired, wind-burned, alone, the silence hit him like a wall. This was his life now. Coming home to empty rooms. Cooking dinner for one. No one to share his day with. No one to laugh at his terrible architectural puns. No one to curl up with on the couch while rain tapped against windows they'd chosen together. He'd left his wedding ring on the mantelpiece at home, beside the clock and the wisteria photograph. He kept touching the bare finger. Phantom weight. The ghost of a promise. His phone buzzed. "Vivian, I'm so sorry. I know those words mean nothing. But I need you to know I hear you. I hear everything you said, and you were right. About all of it." He read it twice, then set the phone face down on the railing and watched the waves. That evening, unable to sleep, he scrolled through old photos on his phone, looking for what, he wasn't sure. Proof that it had been real. Evidence that the last 12 years hadn't been a hallucination. And he found it. A video, dated 2 years ago. His birthday. Vivian had recorded it secretly from across the room. He was blowing out candles on a lopsided cake she'd made from scratch, flowers still in her hair. The camera was shaky, intimate, clearly held by someone who didn't want to be noticed filming. And over the sound of his laughter and the applause of friends, he heard her whisper to the camera, "This is the man I'm going to love for the rest of my life. I don't deserve him, but I'm going to spend every day trying to..." The video was 43 seconds long. Julian watched it 3 times. Then he closed his phone and walked to the shore and stood in the darkness until the cold became unbearable. Because that was the cruelest part. She'd meant it. When she said those words, 2 years ago, she'd meant every one. The love had been real. The vows had been sincere. The woman under the wisteria and the woman in the hotel were the same person, and that was the one truth Julian couldn't architect his way around. People aren't buildings. You can't reinforce them with steel. You can't inspect their foundations and catch the cracks before they spread. People fail in ways that blueprints can't predict. And love, real love, the load-bearing kind, sometimes collapses not because it wasn't strong enough, but because someone stopped maintaining it. He stood on the rocks as dawn approached. The sky shifted from black to charcoal, to a thin pale gold at the horizon. The water caught the first light and turned it into something almost beautiful. Julian breathed in the salt air and felt something stir inside him. Not hope. Not yet. Something quieter, more foundational, the understanding that he would survive this, that the ability to love deeply, to build something meaningful, was not destroyed by this betrayal. It lived in him, the way structural knowledge lives in an architect's hands. It was his, and no one could take it from him. Not even her. He would learn to build again. For himself this time, with higher standards and harder lessons and the unwavering conviction that what he offered was sacred, and the next person who received it would understand that, would protect it the way he always had. 300 miles south, Vivian stood at Marin's window, watching the same dawn touch the rooftops of the city. She looked at her reflection in the glass, a woman she barely recognized. But for the first time, she didn't look away. She let herself see all of it. The selfishness, the cowardice, the wreckage, and she made a quiet promise, not to Julian, not to anyone but herself. No more hiding. No more running from discomfort into the arms of distraction. Whatever came next, the loneliness, the legal proceedings, the slow work of becoming someone she could live with again, she would face it with her eyes open. She picked up her cello. She hadn't played in days. Her fingers found the strings, and she began the opening phrase of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, the piece she used to hum while making Julian's coffee. The notes filled the room, aching and unadorned. She played it all the way through, and when she finished, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was honest. Some houses can be rebuilt after a fire. The damage is assessed, the debris cleared, the new materials brought in. With enough time and care, you might never know something terrible happened there. But some houses burn to the foundation, and all you can do is stand in the ashes, accept what was lost, and decide what to build next. Julian and Vivian's story doesn't end with a reunion. It doesn't end with a dramatic airport scene or a tearful reconciliation or the convenient fiction that love conquers all. Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes love is the thing that gets conquered by carelessness, by selfishness, by the slow accumulation of choices that each seemed small in the moment but together formed an avalanche. What their story ends with is something more difficult and more true. Two people, standing in separate dawns, learning to live with the consequences of what one of them did and the other endured. Julian's lesson was this: trust is not weakness. Loving deeply is not a flaw. The fact that his trust was betrayed doesn't mean he was wrong to give it. It means he gave it to the wrong person. And the right response isn't to stop building. It's to build better, with clearer eyes and a heart that knows its own worth. Vivian's lesson was harder, and she would spend years learning it. Boredom is not an emergency. Restlessness is not a crisis. Aging is not a death sentence. These are ordinary human discomforts, and they have ordinary human solutions: conversation, honesty, vulnerability, the unglamorous daily work of maintaining a life with someone who loves you. She chose the spectacular over the sustainable, the thrilling over the true, and the price was the only man who ever loved her for exactly who she was. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: what you give to the people you love, your loyalty, your honesty, your faithfulness, those things are sacred. They are the architecture of trust, and trust is the only foundation strong enough to hold the weight of a real life together. You can apologize for breaking it, you can grieve it, but you can never unbreak it. Guard what is sacred, or learn to live with the knowledge that you gave it away for something that was never worth the price. And if you're the one who's been betrayed, if you're the one standing in the rain holding the evidence, wondering how the person who promised you forever could hand your heart to someone else, hear me. You are not broken. You are not foolish for trusting. The ability to build something beautiful with another human being is not destroyed by someone else's failure to honor it. That ability is yours. It lives in you. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not soon, but one day, you will build again. And it will be stronger than anything that came before. Because the architect always survives the demolition. The ability to build was never in the structure. It was always in him. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and think about your own relationships, your own choices, the people you love, and the promises you've made, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White, because every story we tell here carries a truth worth remembering. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Julian's place? Would you have waited? Would you have fought? Would you have walked away? There's no wrong answer. Until next time, protect what's sacred and never forget what you're worth.